Hello everyone, before we get started on the main topic today, I wanted to show you this little clip, just to show even veteran players sometimes screw up. It's nothing to be ashamed of, and all you've got to do is brush past it and get on to the next one. Today we're going to talk about air-realistic battles, and this was my main game mode for about 2 years, or maybe even 3 years now, before I really got into ground forces, and then it became my half main game mode, so I play half ground realistic and half air forces. Now, when it comes to air realistic, there are some things to it which are completely different to the other modes. So the first thing is, as I've talked about in the other videos, in every other game mode you get multiple spawns in one way or another, whether it's through the reward system, whether it's just through taking a certain lineup. Well, in air realistic you get one life and one life only, and that is the plane that you queue up with when you try and get into a battle. The reason for this is I have absolutely no idea, but that is what they've decided to do. It is, in my opinion, an archaic system, but it is something you have to realize going forward. Whatever you queue up with, that is all you're gonna get. So you can't take your pick out of anything. On top of this, if you die in an air-realistic battle, you are dead. You are out of the battle. If you are damaged when it comes to your aircraft, or let's say you've run out of ammunition, you can go back to the airfield, land and repair. Another thing that you'll have to get used to in Air Realistic, which isn't really there in Air Arcade, is the fact that you have to, if you're in a fighter or the majority of aircraft, take off from an airfield. Now, I will be doing a video on how to take off in all of the different game modes, but just understand that the majority of the time, 100% throttle, take off flaps, kind of let the plane do it itself, and then give it a little lift with the elevator and you should be alright. But overall, it is an experience you will have to get used to, and don't feel bad if you take off sometimes and you smash your tail into the ground, or if something goes wrong with your takeoff. It happens to us all, but it is something that you will have to understand going forward. On top of this idea in Air Realistic, some aircraft take off from the airfield, others do not. Bombers in general have their own spawns which are higher up in the battlefield, whether it be 4,000 or 5,000 or 3,000 meters, depending on the map itself, and also specific planes such as interceptors and certain attackers also get a lower air spawn, normally around 1,500 to 2,000 meters, once again depending on the map. The reason for this is because certain aircraft are not as good as climbing as others, and therefore this is trying to compensate for that idea. If you had to always take off from an airfield in a bomber, well, you would never be able to get up to altitude before you even get into the battle. On top of this, if we look at the general way that Air Realistic works when it comes to the objectives and the game modes, you have a few ways of winning the battle. It's not like other game modes where there are different objective sets. So in the ground realistic one we talked about battle, conquest, domination, break, all of these different game modes. In Air Realistic it is the same every time. So what you have is a collection of bases on the enemy team. It is normally 3 bases, and then you have an airfield. On top of this you have AI ground vehicles on either side, your ally side and the enemy side, and the main objective of the battle is to be able to win by destroying the enemy's AI / bases / airfield. If you destroy all of the enemy bases, then you get access to destroy their airfield. If you destroy their airfield, it is an instant win, and if you don't do that, then you have to take out the AI ground forces. Now that is the idea behind it, but a lot of the time what you'll find is the other way of winning is just annihilating the enemy team. And this can be incredibly effective if you have a team completely full of fighters, whereas the enemy team might have a few bombers. So those bombers, what they want to do is try and take out the bases to give you a ticket advantage, and maybe some of the AI on the ground attack each other, and on top of that, that means that they take each other out, so you're still winning on tickets. There's a lot of minutiae when it comes to the AI parts of Realistic, but the main thing you have to understand is that if you have more than the enemy, you're generally winning. There is only a few circumstances on certain maps where the odds are stacked against you depending on what team you're on, such as Hokkaido on the British side, where the odds are stacked against you, or something like Iwo Jima, which is a Japanese-American map where it's stacked against the Japanese, where what I mean by that is if you just let each ground force do its thing and not affect it in any way, the Americans will win Hokkaido, and the Americans will also win Iwo Jima. So that is just something you have to take into account. Sometimes you are forced into battles, 1v1 dogfights and stuff like that, which you may not be very happy about, but sometimes you'll have to do it, and that will be all based on your reading of the map and what's going on. In Realistic, there is definitely a lot more map reading that needs to be going on. The first thing to understand is the top right corner and the bottom right corner of the screen are your two friends. The top right is the mini-map, and then if you press your map button, you will see the main map to see where the AI ground forces are, and also to see where enemies are, if they're spotted. And then in the bottom right is the kill feed. Now, the kill feed is something that a lot of people neglect, but it's incredibly important. Let's say the enemy has an attacker or a bomber, and they're killing ground forces at a hell of a rate. Well, all of that will show up in the kill feed in the bottom right, and then you know where that aircraft is if you know the map, which eventually over time you will gain experience in doing this. So with that said, make sure that you're not just focused looking straight ahead. Make sure that you're looking at all corners of your screen, because all of them are important. The reason why the top left is important, it shows all the statistics for your vehicle while it's in the air and also on the ground. So what you have to watch out for is your engine overheating, whether that be oil or water, because remember, in arcade these things cannot happen, but in Realistic you can run your engine ragged if you feel like it. You can run it warm, you can whip it over the top and pretty much rip it apart. So you do have to manage your temperatures, which can also be affected by map. And the way it's affected by map, some maps are colder climates than others, so certain machines on a map like Sinai, where it's incredibly warm and very deserty, will overheat a lot quicker than they will if they're on somewhere like Raw, which is a winter setting where it's cooler. So that is something to take into account. On top of having these mechanics for your engine, you also have limited fuel and you have limited ammunition. In Air Arcade I talked about how with ammunition you can reload it in the air. Well, if you want to do that in Realistic, you have to land, repair and rearm. If you run out of ammunition in the middle of a dogfight, then you better get out of that dogfight or hope that you have an ally which can finish the job. Which means that ammunition is a much more precious resource in Realistic. So wasting it all the time may not be the best idea, but we are going to do a video on how to aim effectively to make sure that you can be as efficient as possible with the ammunition that you're given. The fuel as well is something that you have to realize. A lot of aircraft will have presets for how much fuel to take. The majority of the time it is correct to take the minimum load, because the majority of Realistic battles are pretty much at least over within 10 minutes, and when I mean by over, the battle may not be finished, but it is clear who is going to be the winner of the battle. So taking a lower fuel load will mean that you are a little bit more maneuverable in the air, and in my opinion being a little bit more maneuverable is a lot better than having a slightly better dive speed but feeling like a boat when you come down out of the air. So that is something which you have to take into account. Another thing is, if you are diving at high speeds, your wings, your rudders, your flaps, your ailerons, your landing gear, they can all fall off on you. And this kind of just comes down to experience with some planes. A lot of planes, you'll hear this phrase redline when you're talking to people, and that is when your speed goes red on the top left of your screen. And what that means is your plane is getting to breaking point. It's getting to the point where it's going to say, alright lads, I've had enough, I'm going to just break apart. So you've got to make sure to watch that, either cut your engine or maybe pitch up a little bit to lose some speed but also gain some altitude, and make sure nothing falls off your aircraft, because obviously you don't want to be in the middle of a dogfight and then your wing falls off. It's generally not good cricket. So the next one is also this thing called frame stress overload, which happens at high speed and also rash maneuvering. So let's say you are above an enemy. You are 3,000 meters above them, they're just going in a straight line. You decide to dive on them, you hit them, and then you pull up hard on the elevator. What will happen sometimes is your plane won't be able to take the stress, and your wings will fall off. Opposite side of that, your elevator decides to give up, so you can't pull up anyway. So you've also got to watch out for wing loading stress, which it will show you. On top of this, you also have a mechanic when it comes to your cruise skill called G tolerance. So the harder you pull a turn, especially at higher speeds, you'll get more G's affected on your pilot in a realistic. In arcade it is the same, but it's much to a lesser degree, so you know, you don't have to worry about it too much. But in realistic, it's a big thing when you pull hard and your pilot's going to knock himself out. If you do get knocked out while doing that, then you lose control of the aircraft. This means that your maneuverability is incredibly low for at least a few seconds, and on top of that you can't shoot the main guns, so you do have to watch out for that while flying in a realistic. On top of this, we have more realistic mechanics, such as the carburetor float failure in nil or negative G loads. That is something to watch out for. And also the rudder has a main effect of side slipping and a side effect of rolling rather than yawing aircraft turn. So as you can see, realistic mode for aircraft is one of the most realistic modes that you're gonna end up with in any game, really, apart from the simulator modes in War Thunder, which is also friendly to mouse or controller controls. Now, with this said, this is why War Thunder is so appealing, because it's able to mix the arcadey ideas of a mouse aim and all of these realistic mechanics, and that's why a lot of people love it. But it is something to take into account when you're going forward with it. You have to remember all of the strengths of each aircraft, all of the weaknesses, what's going on with you know, all of that stuff. And it is just something you'll have to get used to over time. Every time I play a new vehicle in realistic, it does feel like I'm playing the game for a new time. I've started the game again, I'm completely rubbish, and I have to learn the aircraft. There is definitely a learning curve to each aircraft in realistic, and because of that, it makes it much more entertaining if you are willing to master aircraft. On top of everything, the arcade temporary boosting, this isn't something that I talked about in the arcade video, but I'll talk about it here. So in arcade, you're able to boost your engine or wet the engine, and every so often it'll go on cooldown and then you can boost it again. In realistic, depending on the aircraft, some don't have access to war emergency power, others can have unlimited war emergency power, and others get it up to a certain altitude. This is very prevalent in some of the Soviet aircraft around rank 3 and 4. With this said, that means that you have to control your usage of it, because it burns fuel faster and it also normally burns your engine out. So there are some aircraft which you can get away with it for a long time, but it is something to understand. And on top of all of this, since it is the realistic mode, there is no lead indicator for you. So that is something that you will also have to get used to. On top of everything though, there is definitely a meta in realistic battles, especially when it comes to fighters. What is nice about the mode is that there is a place for everything, whether you're in an attacker, a bomber, or a fighter. There is a few aircraft in those you know, categories, which are definitely not great for the game mode, but it's definitely something where you can at least make it work in a certain way. There's always going to be ground targets to hit, whether they're hard or soft ones. The soft ones getting taken out by machine guns and cannons, hard ones getting taken out by high caliber cannons bombs and rockets, so your attackers are sorted out. Bases can be killed by bombs and also rockets, so there's your bombers sorted out. Airfield can get killed by bombs and rockets as well, so once again your bombers are sorted out. And fighters, well, fighters can fight the enemy planes and also go after soft targets overall. Now, when I described the way you win a battle at the start, you may be wondering, well, what if I have a whole team of fighters and we can't annihilate the enemy team? Maybe it's a one-on-one situation or a two-on-two. Well, what happens after around about the 20-minute mark on every map? Each side gets 3 sets of light vehicles in the form of trucks which you can destroy, and that will bleed the ticket counter away from the enemy. So you can actually be able to gain an advantage over an enemy which you might be losing on tickets on, even though you're only in a fighter. So you can use your machine guns, your cannons to do that, and be able to sort it so you can win the battle even though you can't carry bombs or you can't carry rockets, and you can't win the AI ground battle. Your AIs are losing it. So there is some nice comeback mechanics there. There is also orders and things like that, but I'll talk about them in a different video since they're a little bit different and a little bit of a more complex idea which requires its own video. Now, I'm not really going to talk about playstyles here. Playstyles in general, you have energy fighting, you have boom and zoom fighting, and you also have maneuverability, or maneuver fighting. So